some of the other things. We're going to be talking about some practical things this morning. And it's not just about necessarily just starting a CS mission, but I put the title there, 0 to 100, because it's getting up to speed with CS. I've had the honour of doing that with some different nations through the years. But by way of transitioning from what we just heard, we are at war, right? That's clear to everyone, right? Right? Our war is not physical, right? We're not bleeding right now. We're not bleeding blood, but we are at war, right? There is no army in the world that is unprepared for war, right? And so we need to be prepared too. So I want to use that as a way of transitioning into what we're going to talk about a little bit this morning in terms of how can we, as Christian surfers, be prepared for what's coming and be prepared for what we're going to face out there, okay? Because we're in that spiritual war. Now, I don't know what it's like growing up in your country, where you're from. I'm Australian, I live in Spain. Where I grew up, in Australia, everyone who surfs wants to be a pro surfer as a grommet, right? That's what you aspire to. I'm going to be a pro surfer. And it's the lifestyle, and it's the image, and it's all those things which is what's attractive, right? But if you watched the finals recently and Felipe winning the world title, did you hear what he said? He said, and I'll quote him textually because that'll be helpful. He said, "It's so hard to put into words, so much sacrifice. I couldn't do it without my team." Now, when we're talking about ministry, obviously, Christian Surfers is a pro ministry, right? It's where the pros in ministry is the most attractive ministry. And a lot of us are attracted to that lifestyle, right? It's not ministry inside. It's not ministry in an ugly environment. We're in the ocean. We're in the outdoors. We're enjoying those things. And so Christian Surfers has a lot attractive about it. And so many of us enter for that reason. And those of us who have been around for a while know what it is to sacrifice for ministry. But let's think about Felipe's his commentary for a little bit, straight after winning the world title. It's hard to put into words. So much sacrifice, I couldn't do it without my team. Right? We're talking here about sacrifice and team. We know about sacrifice. Some of you have been in CS for decades. Some of you are visiting and haven't even joined CS, right, yet. But I want to think about these two terms of sacrifice and team. Now, only a world champion can understand what it takes to become a world champion, but every aspiring world champion knows how to aim at it, right? So that's what I want to talk about this morning. Aiming at doing what we need to do to engage our part of this battle, our part of this spiritual war. Now, success in ministry is often defined by different metrics. If you're a surfer, you win a world title, you're successful. How do we measure success in ministry? Results are a false data in ministry, right? You can do the right things and not get anything. You can stuff it completely and all of a sudden God blesses it. And sometimes it's the inverse of that, right? So there is no real metric in that regard. You can't join results and success in Christian ministry. And the only thing left, just to be really brief, because they've told me to be quick, the only thing left to measure success by in ministry is faithfulness, right? Success is faithfulness. And so in Christian Surfers, it would be like this. Success, faithfulness, is ensuring that God's mission is played out in an ongoing, and I'll ask the guys to start bringing up the slides here, in an ongoing, sustainable and growing way so that every surfer in every surfing community has the opportunity to know and follow Jesus. Now, there are two Australian... Sorry, I'm in the way of the people over here. There are two Australian authors who wrote a book called The Trellis and the Vine. Now, their thesis is, right, you've got the vine, the thing that grows, this living organism, and you've got the trellis, the thing that it grows on. The trellis provides a structure for the growth of the vine. But their thesis is that so much of our ministry investment is in the trellis, is in the structure. We write programs, we invest all our money in new churches, buildings, or new seats, or new instruments, or new sound systems. So much to just provide for the ministry to happen. right? If the trellis is too big, we run the risk of not investing in the vine, right? If the trellis is too small, the vine will outgrow the trellis and will stunt its growth. So what we're talking about this morning is we're talking about having an appropriately sized trellis structure for the ministry, which is the real life, eternal part of what we're doing, right? You need the structure, absolutely, right? But our focus needs to remain on the growth of the vine. I'm losing my notes here. Now, there are 6 things that I want to share with us this morning, and they're in this idea. Structure is the first one. What's the second one? Support. And the third one? Companions, right? Using these 3 ideas, I want to suggest 6 different ways that Christian Service even has built into it to provide these things: structure, support, and companions. Now, I'm going to do it very briefly, but if you want to come this afternoon to the elective as well, we will be going a little bit deeper into it. Now, the first thing I want to mention to us this morning is a leadership team, right? A leadership, if you're not building a leadership team or you haven't built one, you're effectively deciding to work alone with less structure and with less support, right? That's what you're deciding to do. Now, I remember I was in a leadership position that I was appointed to a number of years ago, and Eric talked about being a man alone is a man in danger. But in this leadership position, my goal was, and it was a genuine goal, that everyone else in the field would be at the coalface, that they would be doing the real ministry, and that I would take the responsibility off them and not overly burden other people with this ministry. And it was a nice ideal, but it was stupid, right? Because when the problems came, I was alone and I was vulnerable in so many ways, right? And I hadn't formed a leadership team. So forming the leadership team provides some of that necessary structure. And so what I did after that was obviously form a leadership team. In CS, it's a necessary structure for affiliation, or at least it used to be. It's a necessary support, and it's a helpful support, and you will find your companions there. Now, we all know that proverb that if you want to go fast, go... And if you want to go far... Go together, right? Well done, Audrey, 10 points. So that's the first one, right? The second element towards building a trellis is a board of directors. You can pull that up there, right? A board of directors provides some structure and some support. Now, you might be a very small nation in terms of Christian Service. You might be just a core group of people just checking it out, thinking, why are we going to need a board of directors? But when CS Indonesia started, back 20-something years ago now, the first thing that CS did was form an emerging missions board, right? And in that board, we were totally unprepared for it all, but we were trying, right? And that board ended up being able to raise finances. It ended up being able to send people from foreign countries into Indonesia, receive some back. It ended up being able to build a youth centre in Bali. That board was fundamental in the creation of those things. But I remember we didn't have a clue where we were at the beginning. And Ado, who sends his greetings to everyone, I spoke to him the other day, to anyone that knows him, he was the director until recently. From when it started in 2000 until recently. And I remember him coming to the board and saying quite directly to us, I can't do this alone, I need you to step up, right? And that was a point of inflection for the board, because all of a sudden we realised the responsibility that was on us to support, to provide some structure for the ministry, to connect him with churches, to provide finances, different things like that. But it was also a support that he needed in his, as he was out there alone. Now, it's not an easy task to form a board, is it, Audrey? Right? You can find the right people, or first you're looking for the right profile of person, right? The person that's appropriate for a board. But then when you find that person, often those people are already busy with other boards or other ministries. So it can be difficult, and France is still... They're doing great, but still looking at forming a bigger board there. And it provides those 2 elements there of structure and support. Then third is church partnership. which happens to be one of the Christian Surfers' international strategies. Now, churches aren't always the coolest things to talk about at a conference of Christian surfers. Many aren't relevant, if that's even a thing. Many aren't missional, and that is a thing. And some of us would have even suffered some harm in the context of churches. The bride is messed up, and the bride is ugly, and no one really likes an ugly bride. But as I heard recently, someone say, careful how you talk about the bride, because one day you'll be standing before the groom. Right? Being an Australian in the context of Spain, where we're helping make disciples who make disciples and plant churches that plant churches, I'm constantly aware that I don't belong. Now, one of the things that my wife Ruth and I have always had very clear is that the church in Spain, the one that we came to serve and multiply, has been around for centuries before we were born. And it will be around until Jesus returns, right? Perhaps long after we're gone, or perhaps we're around for that. It is God's redemption community, visible in its local expressions and eternal in its purpose and its duration. CS is not the church, and it won't replace the church in God's redemptive plan. Now, you know that you personally belong to this universal church. You know that you are charged to grow this universal church through making disciples who make disciples. And you know personally, and that as a CS mission, you're also charged with being an example to the church of what incarnational ministry can look like. Because that is essentially what Christian surfers is, surfers doing mission in their own flesh, right? And that's what we do. We surf. We're not fake about that. But we're also very much Christian and Christian first. And if you don't do that, you're limiting your contribution of what God will do through CS to grow his church. Now, around the same time that we were starting Christian Surfers Spain, our church had its 130th anniversary. We're in a very old church. It's the oldest church in our province of Spain. And they decided to do this very elaborate series of activities in the community, something they hadn't done for decades, right? And they asked me to do a surfing event. And so we planned with a local surf school, similar to what Cock was talking about yesterday, with a local partnership, partnering with a local surf school. We did a free surf lesson on the beach. And this church, where we've got largely older people who were fearful to interact with their community, and we've got them all on the beach, and they're all ministering and they're all doing their role, right? Even though there aren't any members of CS currently in our church officially, the church continues to pray for CS and support it financially. So you'll see that church partnership is actually key, not just for our side of things, but also for their side of things, okay? So we're helping them as they're helping us, right? Church partnership in terms of support and companions. The fourth element in building the trellis is the CSI structure. Now, every worker in CS has a leadership structure above them as support. You're not alone. If you're a leader in a country, you have a national leader. If you're a national leader, you have a regional leader. If you're a regional leader, you have a zonal leader, or whatever you call it. And essentially everyone has Phil Williams, right? Yeah. In one way or the other, right? Phil has Roy. Roy, the international director, he's not even alone. He has support in a board and in a leadership team and in a council, right? So all of these pieces of the structure of the trellis, they exist to support your ministry and your mission. Talk to these people. Lean on them. Depend on them. Learn from them. Pray for them. Encourage them. Bless them. Now, when I worked with Brett Davis, the former international director in the international office, there was a direct correlation between those nations who sought out support from the international office and those who didn't. Those who sought out support constantly grew and developed into a national body, and many of those that we were dealing with 20 years ago don't exist, at least in the same form or with the same leaders, because they weren't seeking out that support. Right? So go seeking within Christian surfers that same support. The fifth, which is more of a suggestion than a requirement, is a mentor or a coach. The leadership structure exists to help you in an official way. And you can also seek out support in your own way. When my wife and I, Ruth, we started a team in Gijón in Spain where we live, a ministry team. And one of the requirements for being on our team was that every member had to have a mentor. It was an obligation, right? Outside the structure to support it, but also so that they've got someone to talk to if they need to, right? Neither of the two CS Germany founders are here. I spoke to Miriam a second ago, who's the new director. That's really exciting. But I remember when Nikki and Patrick, when I first had contact with them, they were really excited. They were ready to go. But they just didn't know where to start, right? And so we started actually together looking at their community. I don't know their community. I can't offer anything about their community, but I can ask the right questions, right? And so we started saying, well, where do surfers meet? When do they meet? How do they meet? What do they do when they meet? Like, what's their activity? What's their purpose for when they meet? And Nikki had this idea of the ice bark. And so he said, well, people are surfing there and I surf there frequently and stuff like that. And so they decided to get a table, to get a Christian surfers poster. They may, someone could correct me here, but they may have been the first one to put lights on the ice bark, right? And to serve warm wine at night, right? Super simple, right? How much infrastructure is that? Like, if it cost them anything, it was about 20 euros to set that up, right? But all of a sudden the mission started. How many people are here from Germany now? Hands up. Awesome. What, 10 to 15 people? That's awesome, right? They didn't know where to go. They had everything in terms of energy that they needed, but having someone to support them in that and guide them in that was also helpful. Right, the sixth and final element, which is vital for any and every ministry, is prayer partnership. Now, this one element is more important than the sum of all the others that I've mentioned this morning. Now, my wife and I sat down before we left Australia. We sat down with a seasoned missionary, and he said, the one thing that you need to do before you leave Australia is form a prayer team. Right? We have 500 people who receive our newsletter every month, but we have 168 people who receive a prayer points newsletter every week. Why 168? Because there are 168 hours a week. We effectively have one person praying for us every hour of every week, right? Do it in your own way. Do it personally, but do it, okay? Where does your strength come from? We don't have strength in ourselves. We are at war, in a war where we can't see the enemy always. Sometimes we can see what he does, right? Your strength comes from God. And if you're not building a prayer team, then you're at risk more than if you do. Now, this will be the most important element in the structure, your most vital support and your truest, most fruitful companions. I just want to finish with a story, if the timekeepers will allow me. 2 minutes. 2 minutes up the back as well. Okay. So now I remember first connecting with Christian surfers in Cronulla, where Christian surfers started many years ago. It was the late 80s, and I remember several things about it. I remember some of the great surfers who were there, names like Matt Griggs. So if you're in the surfing world and know these sorts of names, Andy King, who you see he's part of Gabriel Medina's team now. Right, some of these great surfers were there. There was a guy who had teeth, which came out like that, and he was called Teeth. When his younger brother came along, they called him Tooth. So I remember, I remember those things, right? I remember some of the activities, like the time when we were doing a commando night, all dressed in black and running around a park, playing capture the flag, and 8 police cars came with their lights and sirens because a concerned neighbour thought there was a gang brawl happening in the park. But the most important thing that I remember of all that are those leaders who invested in me and who saw me as important, right? There's BD, and there's Potsy, and there's Tomo, and there's Bronco. And there are others there who were there to do that, right? The structure, they had fairly limited structure compared to what we've got today, right? But the structure that was there and that was present, them forming programs, them starting to form a national body, them starting to do all that structure thing provided for that ministry so that they could do it in a safe way. And so when the police come, they could answer, we're Christian surfers and we're official sort of thing, right? Right? But it was the structure that permitted it, okay? The structure isn't the focus, but it will permit Christian surfers, the real living, eternal vine, to